7. And this is probably a familiar passage to most people here. It says, verse 3 through 7, it says, "Trust in the Lord and do good, so shalt thou dwell in the land, and verily thou shalt be fed. Delight yourself also in the Lord, and he shall give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way unto the Lord, trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. And he shall bring forth thy righteousness as the light, and thy judgment as the noonday. Rest in the Lord, and wait patiently for him. Fret not thyself because of him who prospereth in his way, because of the man who bringeth wicked devices to pass." So this is the verse that, well, actually, if you could go ahead, Donnie, and give me another. So just to get some background information on Psalm 37, this was written by David. This is actually a great chapter of the Bible. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this chapter. I'm sure I've read it because I've read through the Bible, but I've never really taken note to Psalm 37. Verse 25 says, "I have been young and now I am old, yet I have not seen the righteous forsaken." And, the interesting thing, of course, this was David writing this. And, David is one of the most talked about people in the Bible. It's funny because actually at our church this morning, we actually had a message on David. David in Israel's history, he's one of their most prominent, if not their most prominent figure in Israel. So, David's a very familiar person. But what I love this and why I'm giving this background information for is because, David was young, and David is a young man. We all know David is young. He had all this glory. He slayed the giant. Everybody knows, even if people, if people are non-church people or, just, I don't know what you call that, a cultural thing, but everybody knows the David versus Goliath. Everybody understands that. But, David was young. Now he's old. David's been a king. He's been a general. He was a leader. He had great glory, great success. He probably had a lot of riches. I believe he started building the plans on the temple. So David had a lot of just glorious things in his life. People would look at him and say, wow, he's done a lot. But he also had a lot of failures in his life. He committed adultery. He committed murder. He had a lot of failures as a father. So David had really a lot of life experience. And that's really why, I think it's important to understand that when we're reading a context to know, who is, of course David was inspired. David was inspired by God when he wrote this, but he also had a lot of great life experience. And I think just like with Mark and Loretta, they've been married for 40 years. Young people. Chris and I, we're youth leaders at Buckeye Baptist. We've been doing that now for, 5 years? 5 or 6 years, been doing it for a little while. And something we always try to encourage our kids to, even for young people, middle-aged people, young adult. I classify myself still as a young adult category. It's 35. That might not be true, but it's good to hang on to that anyway. I think adulthood might start at like 50 possibly. So I'm still hanging on to that young adult thing. So, but it's always good. I'm always surprised by people who don't seek counsel from people who have lived it, who have done it. If you're a young person, you're wanting to date, even date someone, talk to somebody who's married and been married a long time and get their advice. If you're wanting to buy a house, talk to someone who's, bought houses and has that experience. If really any walk in life, anything you want to do, it's kind of just one of those life hacks, I guess you could say. I mean, if you want to be good at something, talk to somebody who's done it. And Chris and I had this conversation the other day. I was surprised somebody had done something, and I'm like, man, I can't believe that person didn't ask. I knew somebody who they knew that very well that had like 15 years of experience in this, and they didn't ask that person. They just went ahead and did it. And it always shocks me when people don't. It's a very simple, very easy thing that you can do, and you can gain a lot of wisdom that way. So in this context, we're hearing from David, who has a lot of life experience. All right, so revisiting verse 3 and 4 again. Again, it says, "Trust in the Lord and do good." And this is the main verse or the main context that we'll be in tonight. But it says, "Trust in the Lord and do good, so shalt thou dwell in the land, and verily thou shalt be fed. delight yourself also in the Lord. He'll give you the desires of your heart. Again, I think verse 4 you guys have probably all heard, or most of you guys have heard this verse. This is a very popular verse. I've heard this verse in my life probably 100 times. Many times. I grew up in church, so I've heard this verse. But it says to delight yourself in the Lord. And one day I'd open up I have a Bible app I use, and every day it sends a verse of the day. So I'd open up the verse of the day, and it said, delight yourself in the Lord. And as simple as that is it seems so just almost overly simple. And I read that and I thought, wow, God's speaking to me through that verse. And it's amazing how good God is and how wonderful God is. The Bible is a unique book. It's not like any other book. You can read another book and you can read it 100 times and you're probably not going to get a whole lot more out of it. But God speaks to us through His Word. And when I read this the 101st time, God spoke to my heart and said, hey, delight yourself in the Lord. And I thought, why? Or what's going on in my life? Or why do I need this? Why do I need this verse? Why is this speaking to me? And I think why it spoke to me is because I think that I realize as Christians, or in my walk, we forget who God is. We forget what our why. We've forgotten what our why is. So many times we start doing things and we want to be busy. We want to do this. We want to do that. But we forget why we're doing what we're doing, and we lose our joy in the Lord doing that. So that was kind of the main thing that really stuck out to me. But I really thought a lot about, and really in preparing for this message, it's interesting because if you've asked Christ into your heart, and if you've made that commitment, think about the day that you asked Christ into your heart, what your feelings were, or what was your commitment. I don't want to mitigate the trust part because, we can say, well, delight and have your joy in the Lord and all those things, but the trust factor is huge too. And David says trust many times through this chapter. So, on that day where you accepted Christ, if you have accepted Christ into your heart, that day you asked Christ into your heart, you trusted God with the most important thing that you have, and that's your soul. So on that day, you said, God, I love you. I accept Jesus into my heart. Forgive me for my sins. I want to commit my way to you. I'm a sinner. Forgive me for my sins. I want to make Jesus the Lord of my life. So we make all these commitments, and they're genuine commitments, and we trust God and we delight in God. But what happens over time? That kind of wears off, and then we start doing things. We may be, in life we may not do a lot. We may get busy with ministry. We may not, but we forget that initial trust. We forget that we've already trusted God with the biggest thing that we can offer, the biggest thing that we have, and that's our soul. So I thought that's interesting. That's something I've never really thought about before. It's just that we just forget our why, and I think that's really why the verse stuck out to me so much. I think as Christians we really stray, don't we? We really we go back and forth. And as Christians, again, the concept's very simple, but we lose constantly. It's a consistent thing of losing our trust, losing our joy, losing our delight. And this is something we have to get back to. It's very simple, trust and delight. The good thing about God is that we know God is who God is, right? We are not that way. God is good all the time. So whenever there's an issue, whenever we fall away, we know whose fault it is. It's our fault. And that's nice to know. I mean, at my job, I have to deal with conflict all the time. I manage people, so I get people, there's always two sides to every story, right? There's always, two people getting in an argument, and typically there's always takes two to tango. There's always two people that are at blame, even if normally it's one person's it's more their fault than the other person's, but typically it's both people's fault. With God, it's nice because it's always our fault, and God is who He is, so God does not change. We were actually just talking yesterday. I'm going to embarrass my wife a little bit, but Krista's aunt and uncle were in town. So we were in the garage just talking. We were looking at the car, and we were looking at Krista's car, and I got to thinking about, and actually I think we even talked about it a little bit, but I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 months ago, or maybe a little bit longer. I think my mom, all the girls were hanging out. I think my mom called and said, hey, just to let you know, Krista's okay, but she hit something hit the car, she hit something with her car, but she's okay, no big deal. But there is damage to the car, just to let you know. I was like, oh man, but she's okay, that's good. As long as she's okay, that's good to know. So she's like, well, Krista's really upset, so when she calls, just make sure, you handle it. Don't get upset with her. Well, I'm fine, it's good, I'm glad she's okay. So I get the call from Krista, and I could tell she was upset. I said, well, what happened? Well, I hit a pole. You hit a pole, so I'm thinking, maybe she was going around the corner, lost control, and ran into something, and maybe the pole had feet and, walked up and hit her. Well, come to find out, I said, why did you hit the pole? Well, I was going through Casanos, the drive-in, and hit a pole. I'm like, well, how do you hit a pole going under 5 miles an hour? It doesn't seem possible. And the damage to her car didn't seem possible either. It's like the whole side of her car was taken out by a pole. So that was some expensive pizza. So, and I didn't get mad. That's one of those lessons after a few years of marriage. You try to not get too upset about things like that. But God doesn't move. God doesn't change. Krista hit that pole standing still, and that's like us. That is like us. I mean, we're driving all over the place, hitting things. God is the same God He was 2,000 years ago as He is today, and that should really be a relief to us to know who God is. We have all this turmoil going on, no matter what your political affiliation is. Our country's changed in the past. It's always changing. But of course, I'm a young adult only at 34. But in my 34 years, the world's changed a lot. A lot of you guys have seen a huge change. My great-grandmother, she was around when there was horse and she passed away a couple years ago. But she would always talk about how when she was a kid, there was horse and buggy still. So you think about horse and buggies to where we're in this information age with our cell phones and everything else. So the world always changes, but God stays the same. That's something that really should comfort us. But something changes in our heart, and there are a lot of things that happen to us that make us change and that pull us away from the Lord, that makes us lose our joy, lose our delight, lose our trust. I think a big thing, and really kind of what I'm covering today, is we become religious. And I hear that in messages a lot. I hear people say, well, you can't become like a Pharisee, or you don't want to do things religious. But what's kind of deceiving about it is that sometimes we do things and we don't even realize why we're doing them. And a lot of times with I talk a lot with Rodney. He's one of our youth leaders as well. We have this conversation a lot just about why are we doing what we're doing? What's the point of doing it? Are we doing this to help kids? That's a great reason to do. I mean, that's great. We want to do it to help kids, but if we're not doing it because we're serving the Lord first, then we're in trouble in our ministries or anything in life. So sometimes we get religious. We forget that we pray to a living God. We forget that we're praying to a God that's a great and holy God. When we're praying, we need to understand who we're praying to. We're not just kind of doing it is very simple to do, right? We bow our heads and we give a quick prayer. Same thing with our Bible. The Bible's sharper than any two-edged sword. So, reading that Bible, the Bible, cuts through. It changes. There's no other book that does what the Bible does. But we tend to forget that. Of course, sin can take us away from the Lord. Apathy. I just said apathy, lukewarm. We become very apathetic. We don't really think about. We're just going through the motions. We go to church and we're going through the motions. We're checking boxes. So that's just some things I've thought about as far as just things that kind of pull us away from the Lord. As I read this verse, and it's funny because a lot of times we'll read the Bible and we'll see a verse that really speaks to us. And I love the promises of God, especially young people. You guys being young, you guys need promises. We all need promises from God of what does God tell us He's going to do. Verse is that? I guess it's verse 4. Yeah, verse 4, delight yourself in the Lord. He's going to give you the desires of your heart. Normally, when I read the Bible anyway, and probably human nature, we look at what the promise is, right? We say, He's going to give me the desires of my heart. That's what God's promising. If we do this, God's going to do this. But that's kind of that's kind of our human nature sometimes, is just to look at the promises of what promises God has for us. And we forget that we're doing them because we delight in God. And I looked at this, I said, I should be delighting in God. I shouldn't be doing this because I just want God to give me what I want. And I love the promises, guys. If especially younger people, Proverbs 3, trust in the Lord. Philippians 4, be anxious for nothing, but everything by prayer and supplication. Psalm 1 is a great chapter, a lot of promises in there too. So there's a lot of promises we all need to understand. We all need to claim for our lives that God has for us. But we need to understand why. Why are we doing things just to get those things from God? Or are we doing those things? What is the source and the why of what we're doing? I think that's what I'm trying to say in that. I have a 2.5-year-old, or actually she's not 2.5 yet. She's just 2 years and a couple months. My daughter Remy, and she's a handful. She is all personality. My daughter is. I mean, she's hilarious. She says some really funny things already. She's telling people to go away, and it's like, wow. She told me yesterday to go away. I was like, man, that's kind of rough. So, but we love her, and you do your best, and I was thinking about my daughter and where she's at now, and when she gets a little bit older and she can really understand things, and she can really start to understand what love is and those kind of things, and what if with her, what if she came up to me and said, Dad, I love you because you're doing this for me. I love you because I know you'll give me shelter. I love you because you're going to get me a car one day, and because you do this and because you do that. And, that's sad. That would break my heart, and I think with my parents, if I, dealt with my parents and said, well, I just love you guys because you helped me with this and you helped me with that, and I don't actually love them for who they are, that would be heartbreaking. And that's really what we do with God, or I do with God. I mean, I'm not throwing stones here. This is something I do with God. I think it's our tendency as Christians. We kind of approach God with that, God, what can you do for me kind of mentality. But we forget who God is. We forget the source of all of these things. The source is God. That's who our admiration should be in. That's our why. Our why is how great God is. I had this statement I wrote up, and I'm going to read it. I think it's very important. It says, doing anything for God or in the name of God should only ever be done because we love God and we want to glorify Him. When we start doing things for good work's sake or to get something back, we will quickly find ourselves distant from God and not know why. This should be a big part of your daily why. And I ask myself this question a lot. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Why am I trying to be a good testimony at work? Am I trying to do that because I want to impress people? Why am I doing these things? And we've experienced it. We've experienced it with our youth group. A lot of times we'll have a lot of discouraging things with kids, and we have a lot of great things with kids. We've seen a lot of really great things. We've seen people come to the Lord that we never thought would come to the Lord. We've seen a lot of really good things happen. But we also have, as anything in life, you have a lot of discouragement too. You have people that give you money for an activity, or don't give you. I'll give you an IOU, and then they never pay you, and it's like, well, it's not that big of a deal. It's just a principle, And you go, okay, well, why am I doing this? Okay, I'm doing this for the Lord. Not a big deal. That's a small thing. You have people who always, I think some people don't even know other people will be a discouragement to your ministry, and just kind of pour rain on your parade. They might say, it's funny because Rodney and I had a conversation about this not too long ago. We were talking about, what's our why, and we're doing this to love the Lord. And that day, a guy came up to me and said, hey, you left the heater on out there, and what are you thinking out in town? I'm like, whoa, it's like, and what's interesting is that when we have that attitude of, I'm doing this for God, it was just like, okay, I'm sorry, no big deal. But when that's not our attitude, when our mindset is different, when our mindset is I'm doing this to make a difference or to help people out, it completely changes. That my reaction would have completely changed if that wasn't the mindset. All right, thanks. Okay, so what is the light? as I began to study, I really wanted to know, what does it mean to delight? And honestly, the definition was a lot different than what I thought it was going to be. We're a little bit different. Delight's really not a word that we use. I mean, I don't think I've ever used the word delight before. Sunny delight? I don't know. I've just never used the word. I don't think I've ever used that in my life. What does delight mean? And really, I looked up different translations, different commentaries. Every one of them used this word delight. The message there our pastor gave at Buckeye, delight was all over Psalm 40. Delight. David used that word repetitively. Delight yourself in the Lord. Psalm 40, David said, I delight in the Lord. His law is in my heart. It's an interesting word. It's a unique word. It's not a word used flippantly. It means to be greatly pleased, enchanted, captivated, thrilled. So this isn't like when I thought delight just meant, to be kind of just generally happy or something like that. This is a strong word. This is a very strong adjective. To be enchanted, captivated, thrilled. Like a lot of Cincinnati people, we're captivated by the Bengals, aren't we? Or some people are. I'm not. Some people are. They're really captivated, thrilled, enthralled. That's the kind of language we use here. Sports, people are. And I love the Buckeyes. When I watch the Buckeye game, it is, Kristen, everybody knows I'm locking myself in the basement, and it's serious. I'm captivated with that. People are captivated with their sports. That's the kind of language that David uses here. It's very strong language that we use, and that's how we should view God. We should be delighted in the Lord. This is John Piper's words. The second line here. This is definitely not me. John Piper says, practically defined, delighting in the Lord is seeing and savoring the diverse excellencies of God. That's definitely not my language. Seeing and savoring. So, we see God and we savor, we enjoy the diverse excellencies of God. I thought, well, it took me a minute to really fully let that sink in. Seeing and savoring the many excellencies, the many great things of God. And that's a great way to break that verse down. So what are the diverse excellencies? I started thinking, what makes God worthy of our worship, of our devotion? A few things. I said his character, his love, his holiness. They sang, holy, holy, holy. He's perfect, creator of everything. Can you guys think of anything else? I'm going to let you guys interact here a little bit. In the youth department, I told before the service I was talking, I'm used when I speak to youth, I love it because I'm closer, and I like to really go back and forth a lot. So with this, I feel so far away from you guys. So what are some attributes of God that you guys see that that's worthy of our devotion with God? He's faithful. He is. 100% of the time. Merciful. His love. Forgiveness. Absolutely. Anybody else? The King of Kings. Wow, that's a great one. That's a great one. He is the King of Kings. That's really good. He is. He is the King of all kings. For us, we get so, in the politics, we get so into whoever's the president of our country, and it's such a big deal. And it's like, well, God's in control. He's the King of all the kings. So John Piper says, it's the diverse excellencies of God. That's breaking down, delight yourself in the Lord. Seeing and savoring the diverse excellencies of God. How about that, I think you guys might have touched on this a little bit, but he sent his son, he manifested himself through Jesus Christ so that we can have salvation. That's pretty amazing as well. So these are the things, when we talk about admiring God, we look at God, these are the things that we need to think about. Who God is. These are a lot of great attributes of God. I was reading John Piper's commentary, and he was saying, we are people who love to admire. And I was like, I don't think I really like to admire. I'm not really an admirer. Then he started talking about sports, and I'm like, yeah, we admire our sports figures. We love, I enjoy watching LeBron. We just have the LeBron versus Michael Jordan debate all the time. Who's the greatest? And we love to watch greatness. We love to admire great things. Women, what do women admire? I can tell you, women admire their savings at the stores, don't they? My wife loves, she brings home them Kohl's receipts like a guy brings in a trophy buck. I mean, she brings that thing in. She's got it underlined. They underline. It's the marketing is just genius at Kohl's. It blows my mind. They're geniuses. They put "you saved" in big letters. She brings those receipts home. You saved $300. Well, how much did you spend? Let's see that bottom line of what you actually spent there. You know, so women love to admire those receipts. We are admiring creatures. And practical application. So as we dive deeper into this, I'm trying to think, how do we apply this? It's great to say we know who God is. We can define who God is. How do we actually apply that to our life? First is with our mind. We need to have the right perspective of God. That's what we just talked about. God isn't a genie in a bottle. That sounds funny, but a lot of times that's how we pray to God. God, can you do this, 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 and this, and this? And I want to claim this promise, and this promise. But God also isn't the great cosmic killjoy either, where he, wants to be the great rule maker and we have to follow all these rules either. There's an in-between there. But it's difficult. As we really think about this practically, even with our minds, even knowing this, even saying, well, I know who God is, and I know that God is, holy of holies. He's perfect. He sent His Son Jesus. He is, merciful, graceful. So many great attributes God has. We have to have that. We have to have that in our mind, and then we have to actually apply it. We have to grasp that concept and put it in our mind and know who God is. But it's difficult. Even knowing that is difficult. We're in the great information age. We all go 100 miles an hour, and that's just the way it is. I mean, that's just who we are. That's our culture. And I go 100 miles an hour. We've got kids. That changes with kids. I haven't watched Netflix in a week. It's crazy, right? It's torture. I haven't got to watch Netflix. So you get kids. You get all these things, and we're always doing something. I'm going 100 miles an hour at work. Come home, spend time with the family. And of course, the cell phones. We love our I love being on the cell phones. I love going from page to page to page to page and get as much information as I can. And I'm, downloading and getting information, and we're just inundated. That's who we are. That's our culture. We have to find a way to slow it down a little bit and put God in our minds first. Second is with our mouth. We can delight in God with our mouth. First is through prayer. When we pray to God, we need to acknowledge who God is in prayer. And I think this is probably one of the biggest ways to apply this to your life and to your walk is to, when you pray, you don't say, God, I admire you. That's okay. But, get into specifics. God, it's awesome that you're a creator. I mean, if you guys ever just looked outside and just say, it isn't awesome that God's created all this stuff. If you go down to Tennessee and you see the mountains and see all these things, and you really grasp that God is the creator. We need to grasp who God is, and we need to verbalize that to God. Acknowledge His diverse excellencies in prayer. Acknowledge Him to others. When people talk about God, and it normally gets into kind of a religious conversation. I get that question all the time. Why are you religious? You're religious. I'm like, no. Well, I guess so. I don't know. I mean, I follow God. I follow Jesus. I mean, that's probably another message. But, that's something that, acknowledge who God is. God's a great God. He's a holy. It comes out when you talk to your friends, the joy you have and who you believe God is. Your friends and your family and your coworkers will get that from your conversation. Through our actions, we can delight in God through our actions. Once you get it in your mind and once you verbalize it, the actions come a lot easier. The Bible doesn't say there's anything wrong with other things. I put up here some of the things that we spend our time with as our family, our career, leisure activities, right? We have a lot of things going on with our time. But through our actions, we have to have God, our delight in God, our joy in the Lord, our trust in God. Those things we have to trust in God first. That delight has to be there first before anything else. And for example, with a family, you might say, well, some people might say, well, you can't put God before your family. Well, if you put God first, when I put God first, I'm a much better dad. I'm a much better son. I'm a much better brother. When I've got God first in my life, I know God commands some very serious things about marriage. God commands that. So when I'm following God, I'm treating my family and raising my family the way the best, God's best is for our life. So when I put God first, I'm a much better family person. I'm a much better dad. With our careers, and this is a big one for me, I'm very passionate. I try to do, everything I do, I try to do to the best of my abilities. I want to be good at whatever I do. With most things, some things, I try to be real. I'm very passionate about my family. I'm very passionate about my job and what I do. I don't think it's nothing wrong with wanting to be great. I think we should strive to be great servants of God. We should try to glorify Him greatly. And I think God wants us to glorify Him. I know at my job, people who work with me, if that person doesn't work hard and they're a Christian, man, that's kind of like a bad mark on them. I think, man, are you really outside? I mean, it doesn't speak good on people when they're not, really doing the best of their ability. So when we're passionate about things like our job, and if we're putting that job before our family, man, that's so hard, or before God rather. You got the weight of your job is on your shoulders. When I put God first and I go into my job and I'm trusting in the Lord, I can still be passionate about my job. I can still be as passionate. I can be as passionate as anybody else about my job. But the great thing is that when I delight in God first, that pressure of my job is much less. It's still there, but it's much less. That burden of my job is much less because I know God's got my best. God's got my best at heart. I know God's going to give me the best for His life. So if my job doesn't work out, the business fails or whatever happens, I know God's got something else out there for me. And you can live with that. And of course, with our leisure time, I think God wants us to have fun. I do. I really believe that. I think we should be having fun, spending quality time with our families. Those are all great things. Some people only live for that weekend fun activity, and that's really not how we should be living life. A lot of people at my job, that's all they do. They're just waiting for that Friday night, what they're going to be doing on the weekends. But there's definitely a place for leisure as well. Donnie. So what's awesome is there's a parallel here, Matthew 22. This is Jesus speaking, because Jesus knew what where our hearts are at. He said when the Pharisees had heard that he had put the Sadducees to silence, they were gathered together. Then one of them, which was a lawyer, asked him a question, tempting him, saying, "Master, which is the great commandment in the law?" Jesus said unto him, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, all thy soul, and all thy mind." Jesus confirms this. Jesus knew, and I've always read this verse in a different way, but Jesus knows even us. He knows that we don't want to put God. I mean, I hate to say, I don't say we don't want to put God first, but it's so easy to put God aside. Let me go ahead and do my religion. Go ahead, let me do my thing. I'm going to go to church. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. But he knew. Jesus knew. He said, we need to love the Lord with all our heart, all our soul, all our mind. That's a command from Jesus. Before we do anything else, this should be our first step. Before we do any kind of anything, we need to make sure, have we put God first in our life? And I think that's a good way to change. If you're really experiencing a lot of kind of stagnation, maybe frustration, not feel like you're getting anywhere in your prayer life, I think this is a really good place to start. You can skip this one. I'm running out of time. Mark said if I went over 35 minutes, I'd be out of the family, so I gotta wrap it up here. And this is my last slide. This is kind of a recap of the entire 3 through 7 here. Again, it's a great chapter. If I had an hour or whatever, I could have done more on this, but there's so many truths in this chapter. It really is. It's a chapter I've never dove into, but there's just a lot of good material in it. So this is how I read it. Trust in the Lord. Verse 3 says, trust in the Lord. Verse 4 says, delight in the Lord. What happens a lot of times is we take out the trust and the delight and we go right to trying to commit your way and right to try to being patient. But we don't trust. We forget to trust God and we forget to delight in Him. But when we trust in God, when we delight in God, everything else falls in place so much easier. When we love God, all these things just fall into place so much easier. It's so much easier to be patient with God. And actually in our message there, our pastor was talking about waiting on God. When you're waiting on God, you're actually holding on to God. You're clinging to God. It's hard to hold on to somebody if you don't trust them, isn't it? So, when we trust in God, we love God, it's easy to hold on God and wait for Him. Because there's a lot of things in life that are hard that we do have to wait on Him. So it makes it a lot easier when we do those two things first. So maybe you are maybe you're a little bit stale, maybe you're stuck in a spot. Maybe that'll help you is trusting and delighting. I was talking to Krista about this lesson and about Psalm 37, and she reminded me. She said, "You remember?" She said, "That's a verse you gave me when we were in the delivery room. How many weeks ago was that now? 6 weeks ago. So 6 weeks ago, we were in the delivery room with Krista was having the baby. I was watching. I was hoping to kind of get a pass on that, but that's not the way it works. So, we were in the living room, and I opened up my Bible app again and read this Psalm 37, and it said, you see right here. Well, actually, it's gone, but it said, "Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart." And I read that whole chapter, and I said, "Krista, you got to be kidding me! Look at this verse I just opened up, and God gave me this verse to read today." And in verse 25, like David said, he was young, now he's old. He's never seen the righteous forsaken. I've never seen the righteous forsaken ever. I'm still young, relatively, but I've never seen the righteous forsaken. Sometimes the lost world might say, "Well, what about this? What about pain and suffering? What about this great monsoon in Thailand?" Or these are real tragedies that occur. Bad things happen to good people. They do. And it's sad. We're all, I may live another 5 years, 100 years, I don't know. 100 years might be stretching it. But, we all have our time, and we all have pain and suffering. There's a lot of people, there's actually people in my family right now that we love, that one person in particular that's going through something very difficult. Great man of God, one of the greatest men of God I've ever known. We don't understand it. We don't understand pain and suffering, do we? It's difficult. And we say, well, why is God allowing this to happen? Why, if we're supposed to delight in the Lord and He gives us the desires of our heart. And by the way, the desires of your heart, we do get the desires. This is one of those 100% promise things, because when you trust in the Lord and you delight in Him, He gives you the desires of heart because He changes you. He changes you. He changes your heart to where you line up with God and His desires become your desires. But, with pain and suffering, when we ask Christ into our life, we put our soul in God's hands. That's an assurance, but in Matthew 7, the Bible says, the storms of life, whether your house is built on the rock or whether your house is built on the sand, the storms, the winds, the floods are going to come. The difference is, if we know Jesus, if we have Jesus in our heart, if we're saved, our house is built on the rock. The Bible never promises that you're going to have it easy. The contrary, it says the storms of life are going to come to both sets of people. The difference is that our life, our soul is in God's hands. And that's something I think that we can all delight in. So, again, I hope this has been helpful to you, and hopefully this is something you can apply in your daily walk. Thanks.